Headwards?
A widow has to be treated with respect and tolerance and sensitivity. What if that person is a bully and needs to learn how to be nice? How do you reconcile that with we should be very considerate to that person, but at the same time, she shouldn't get away with being a bully?
Okay. I'm going to leave it as a great question. Hopefully,
Sorry.
we'll answer it by the end of the year. So thanks for starting us with that good question as well. Brilliant question. Um, you know, it really is a good question to start off the topic with, because it gets us thinking, what do we do in a situation where, so you've already taken it, you've already stepped ahead and said half the share, which is that we have to treat a widow with sensitivity, right? So you're already one step ahead, as in you now recognize that we have to be very sensitive to widows and orphans. The question is, who's responsible for them, and what is our responsibles towards them? Now, it's a strange topic because it seems like common sense, right? I like the example of, we're supposed to be careful with all people, respectful of all people. The Torah gives us extra warning when it comes to sensitive people. Who does the Torah give us extra warning about when it comes to being sensitive? So we spoke about one of these groups previously, and that was the group of converts, right? That because a convert, and we'll touch on that a little bit tonight as well, because a convert is a person that has left their old family, sometimes at least, and has joined a new, and they've gone and had like lots of sacrifice and hardships to join. And they don't, so to speak, they're not like born into it where they kind of fit into the new things and they're trying to fresh, a convert from the word in Hebrew is a ger. A ger means a stranger. They're not like part of the crew. They never grew up with you. And they're going to try to fit in. So the Torah gives us extra warning to be extra carefully, to be extra nice to them, right? And the Torah gives us, so therefore, when we're nice to a convert, it's more important in a sense. It's not really more important, but in a sense, it's more important than being nice to a regular Jew. Why are you nice to a regular Jew? You fulfill the mitzvah of Avat Yisrael, of loving your fellow Jew. When you're nice to a convert, you fulfill the obligation not only of being nice to a fellow Jew, but you're also being nice to the convert. The two mitzvahs you get, Avas Yisrael and Avas Hager. It's two separate mitzvahs. So it's a double whammy. Now, the same thing is going to be when it comes to a convert, to a orphan and a widow. Now, an orphan and a widow have the same category. They fit into almost the same category as the convert in the sense of why. Why is the Torah wanting us to be extra careful with them? Sorry, I'm just going to quickly see if I could find the source, which I thought I'd opened, but everything got messed up about their own. So why is the Torah being extra careful with the convert, with the orphan and the widow? Is because they are they're somewhat sensitive. They've had a hard life, and they don't have, so to speak, the person there to protect them. They may be lacking in protection. Now, we think of it on the one hand, a good sensitive person, a good healthy person doesn't have to be warned to be good to the convert, to the orphan, or to the convert, or to the widow. It's a common knowledge. It seems logical. But here's the thing. Common knowledge, and this is something that you see in the Torah, common sense is not always so common, right? That's the way it is. Not only that, what's common sense to one person, to other person might not be. And you see this concept very strongly in the world. In reality, we see that people that should be having the most tolerance and respect them are often the people that are most abused and taken advantage of. And it's a fact. Because people, for example, molesters and abusers, abusive people, they looked for people that don't have the backing, that don't have the support, don't have the repercussions, so to speak, of mainstream people, and therefore they choose them to pick on. And those are the easy victims. And unfortunately, that's reality. So therefore, the Torah goes out, the Torah understands the human reality and understands that there's certain people that are more sensitive and they have common sense. And it warns us to be extra careful to make sure that those people that are more prone to being abused or being not taken care of, have that extra protection. This is a fundamental concept in Judaism. Now, why do I say it's a fundamental concept in Judaism? What's fundamental about Judaism? Yes, we know Gemilut Chasadim, being kind to others, is fundamental in Judaism. We know that taking care and giving charity and being sensitive and respectful is fundamental to Judaism. But what's fundamental about this concept that's so to speak, unique to Judaism? Here's what's fundamental and unique about it, is that Torah has, and this is a concept that I'll keep on repeating as every time we see it, has a major difference between the way the Torah works and the way secular law works. Secular law works that it's there in place to protect the rights of people. People have rights, and therefore we want to protect those rights. You have a right to, in America, for example, we have a right to happiness. Nobody's allowed to take away your right to happiness. You can't be enslaved by anybody. That's a right that you have. You have a right to be protected by your parents. And if your parents are not protecting you, then it's... In Judaism, it's the total opposite. Nobody has any rights in Judaism. There's no such thing as rights, what your rights are. People have responsibilities. It's all about responsibility. You were created with a mission. What's your responsibility? It's not about your rights. It's about your responsibility. It's a totally different, fundamentally different outlook in life. Why is it so fundamentally different? Because if my outlook in life is that I have rights, it's all me-centered. What is my rights and how can I protect my own rights and how can I get what I deserve? It's all about my own expectations and my own, what comes to me, what I deserve, and my own ego and my own needs and desires being met and everybody else having to run around me. That's the concept of how it works in secular society. Judaism does not care about what your rights are. It's not about protecting yourself. It's about protecting your others. It's a responsibility to other people. If we focus on others, then we have a good world. Then you know what? Everybody's rights will be protected. But when we're all focusing on protecting our rights, nobody will be taking care of those people that can't take care of themselves. This is a crucial difference. So, for the example that I love giving, which I've given numerous times in the Shiurim, is if you're walking down the street and you see somebody that's dying, drowning in the ocean, if you happen to be in a rush for a meeting, you could say, you know what, I'm sorry, you know what, for the poor guy, let him drown. What can I do? I'm in a rush to a meeting. My $200 that I'm going to make out of this meeting are more important than that guy's life. You have a right to say, could you be imprisoned? No. Could people say that you're a sleazy, egotistic, narcissistic, whatever else descriptions? They can say whatever they want. You cannot be incriminated because of that. On the other hand, in Judaism, it says we spoke about this last week. You're not allowed to stand on your brother's blood. If you see somebody else is in trouble, the Torah says if you're walking past your enemy's donkey and you see your enemy's donkey overladen with parcels and his pickup truck is not moving, right? That's what the donkey is. And you see that the donkey is struggling, but it's your enemy's donkey. You're obligated to help him. And if you don't, you're responsible. It's a fundamental difference. It's not a fundamental difference. It's a worlds apart. We live life The way we're supposed to live life is we're supposed to be looking, where can I do? What is my responsibility? What am I obligated to do? And it's always by trying to find the next way of how I can either help somebody else or do something else that I was created for. Like we says, I was only created to serve my master. The world was created for me to do a purpose. The other world is I was whatever I am. I was born. Now everybody has to make sure that nobody gets in my way. I have my dreams. I want to, own the fanciest car. I want to play the best computer games. I want to go on the best holidays or whatever it is. All these type of things, no one's allowed to get in my way to having them. You can't hurt me. You can't violate me. Okay, fine. Judaism agrees. Nobody should be doing these things. But who has to protect you? No one. Of course, there's one of the 7 Noahide laws is to set up courts of justice so that people that are in trouble, do get hurt, are actually protected. So the court, the government is responsible to making sure that people don't hurt other people, take away, because hurting other people is taking away their rights. But they can't come and say, sorry, this is your responsibility. Now, in modern law, this has slightly been changed, and there are certain cases where, for example, when it comes to child abuse, child sexual abuse and things like that. Hi, Leon and Irene, welcome. Good night.
Hi.
Good evening.
Good evening. Sorry we're late.
No, all good. All good. Good to have you.
Get in.
There is a case in Judaism, in secular law, where you can find the concept of responsibility. And that's when we see, for example, if a person is a teacher in a school, and Irene used to be a teacher in the schools for many years, correct, Irene?
Yes.
So this was prior to your days of teaching. Modern teachers, they have to be, every year, they have to renew their accreditation in child protection. And they are what we called, I forgot the exact termination.
Probationary, is it?
No, responsible reporters or something like that.
Okay.
There's the term that they use for it, but basically what it means is that if they have a suspicion that a child is being violated, abused, or something like that, they're obligated to report it.
Yes.
And if they don't, then they can. Now, there's a whole question today in certain things, for certain reasons, many people can be doing it, can be in such a position and in numerous positions. But that's where you see where they've placed responsibility on people to protect others. And of course, there's the responsibility but that goes back to this concept of the reason why the responsibility is there is because the children have rights not to be violated or to have a healthy upbringing, not necessarily because the responsibility of the parent per se, or the child or the teacher per se. So I was once listening to a class on parenting, and this person would say, you have to know what your children's rights are. If you want to be a good parent, you have to know what your children's right. Your children has a right to food and drink. Your child has a right to safety. Your child has a right not to be hurt, etc., etc. Your child has a right to education.
Yes.
And therefore, if you're violating those rights, you're not a good parent. You're going against the law because you're violating somebody else's rights. Now, here's the Jewish take. Judaism says the total opposite. Nobody has rights. Children don't have rights. Parents have responsibilities. You have a responsibility to take care of your children, to feed your children. You have a responsibility to educate your children. You have a responsibility to teach your children how to swim so they don't drown. It's not that your children have the right to know how to swim. You have the obligation to teach them. The responsibility falls on you. It's your responsibility. It's not about
Rabbi,
what your children have a right to. It's got nothing to do with rights. It's got to do with the responsibility of the other people to protect them or to provide them. And this is where we get into our particularly interesting mitzvah that we're discussing tonight, the mitzvah of, number one, caring and protecting for those people that are particularly sensitive. And tonight we're going to focus on widows and orphans. Yes, Joe.
sorry, I just need to add a couple of terms there because we're comparing the Western law and the Jewish law. So I think the first one I talk about is mandatory reporting.
That's right. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's right.
Now, mandatory reporting applies not just in that area, as many other areas in occupational health and safety, near misses, close calls, there's mandatory reporting. It's actually illegal to not report when an incident occurs. And that arrangement's been in place for a very long time. And so I wanted to share that one. That's the reporting side. The other side in Western law is perhaps the concept of negligence. So if someone has a responsibility which they don't fulfill, they then can be charged with negligence of their duty and held accountable and punished through the law there. So I just want to say that Western law does indeed have those.
So that's only, so let me just say, generally, almost always, those responsibilities will only fall on people in particular positions. In other words, they could only be incriminated if, for example, they work in a school, then they are a mandatory reporter or a teacher. Or if they're a doctor, then and they're negligent in the way they prescribe their medication, then they could be considered negligent. But if they're just a bystander, right, and they're walking past, they have no responsibility to that person. They have no obligation to help that person. In most cases, there could be certain exceptions, but that's the general rule that we could say, well, you're getting paid for a particular position. You have a particular license. This is your license to do certain things. And that's something which, as I say, as modern times, these are things that have changed, that more and more people are becoming mandatory, whether it's reporters or mandatory people that are held in certain criteria. You're getting paid for a certain position, and therefore if you don't fulfill the obligations of your position, then your qualifications, so to speak, could be taken away. It's always since they ever started the concept of child protection, parents that are negligent with their children could have their children taken away from them. It's not that although it's not that the parents are not necessarily doing their responsibility, it's more that the children are not being protected, don't have their rights protected. Once again, it's different ways of how you can look at it, but it's a general outlook of how we see our position in life. Whether we see our position in life as, for example, and here's just something which somebody told me, I don't listen to the radio much. Actually, I never listen to the radio, I'll be honest. I have so much to listen to today, although, to be honest, many people don't listen to the radio anymore because there's so much you could listen to online with classes and podcasts and audiobooks and who knows what else you could be listening to, music. So there's, you could choose yourself. You don't have to wait and listen to all the advertisements. So nobody bothers with radio. But anyway, I was on a chat group today, one of these rabbinic chat groups, and they said, well, on 774, which I suppose most of you may know, it's probably the famous, in South Africa, everyone listened to 702. That was the famous talk show. They're talking about, voluntary, what they call it over here, voluntary suicide or something like that. The person that was fundamental in implementing it or bringing it to light with the Victorian government. Now, that's an example of where, of course, I'm sure you could imagine that suicide by choice is it's a topic in and of itself, which we're not getting into tonight, but possibly we will do that one day, is something which would be very questionable according to Judaism, because your life, even if you're struggling, and now there could be exceptions, I'm not saying it as a blatant statement, but definitely not based on the way the new laws are in Victoria. But your life is not in your hands to say, you know what, I've lived long enough. It's just not funny anymore. Let's end it, type of thing. Or I'm just in too much pain. It doesn't work that way. You're not allowed to take a life. It doesn't make a difference when, is almost always, there are exceptions, as I say, is almost always considered murder. And it includes your life or somebody else's life, right? So assisted suicide, or what other names do they call it? Joe, you would know the right in the term.
Sorry, I'm mute. Euthanasia. It's voluntary euthanasia.
But what's the other law that they gave it? I think they have a particular name that they called this law. Anyway, but the point is saying that my life is my right. I have a right to my life, and therefore when I want to end it, I should. Doesn't that sound strange?
It's not as simple as that. You have to have 2 or 3 doctors sign you off, etc. It's
exactly.
a long,
they
it's
have
a big
2 or 3 doctors signing you off, that you fully understand the repercussions and that there are serious reasons for it.
I think it only works if you're in severe pain where they can no longer help you in palliative care. It's a lot more complex than what you
it's assisted dying legislation, voluntary euthanasia. There's several names for it, and the idea is to protect the doctors who participate from criminal action.
Absolutely.
Yes, but the idea is also that when these type of things happen, so I'm not going to, as I said, there are exceptions to it. It's not as simple, but the very fact that somebody could at some point take somebody else's life, in general, is something that, from a Jewish perspective, it says your life is not in your hands to decide what to do with it. And you decide for whatever reason that you want to end it. You can pray for your life to end. And there are times that we will pray for a person's life to end. We can do that. We can passively make a person's life end by, for example, not giving them medication. But to actively cause a person to die is something that we generally, in almost all circumstances, cannot do. There are a few exceptions, as I say. And that's something where you would say, why not? This person wants to end their life, it could be very good reason. They could be really suffering, and therefore, I would say, from a secular perspective, I fully get it. But from a Jewish perspective, your life is not yours. You're given a life by God, and therefore He will decide when to take your life.
Rabbi, can I add another term, in English terms, to the discussion? So duty of care is a very important term legally in this discussion, whether people have a duty of care or not to someone else. The courts look very closely at that. So there's negligence, there's the duty of care. And I think I understand what you're saying, is that there's a question of a duty of care towards, say, the widow, the orphan, the secular, the legal view versus the Torah view, or indeed that person who's drowning, the duty of care. This is something I had to learn, and probably Yochanan did at some point too, is, in Western law, if someone's drowning, we don't have to help them. In Western law, we can walk past. But if we decide to intervene, as soon as we take control of that patient, we have an immediate duty of care.
That's right.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that, Joe, that, if you're doing first aid, and we've probably both got first aid certificates, and once you attend someone, you have a duty of care. From there on, you can't leave them. You have to go ahead. Once you made that choice, that's it. Otherwise, you are in big problems, I think. Am I right to say that, Joe?
Absolutely. Yeah. If you abandon the patient once you've taken control of the situation, then you can be charged with negligence.
Right. Okay, so that's what you're seeing. That's another example of where modern secular law is also putting this concept of responsibility on people, right? Now, so this is our topic of today, where this is not, when you've made the choice. In Judaism, you don't have a choice whether to act. You're obligated, whether you like it or not, if you're in a position to help. If you're not in a position to help, then of course you're exempt. If you're in Japan and the person is dying in New York, there's no obligation. But if it's something that comes across and it's in your way, you have an obligation whether you choose or not. There's no choice, it's responsibility. Okay? And that's where in I suppose the difference would be, you have an initial choice in secular law. In Judaism, there's no such thing as choice. When it comes to this thing, when you see somebody in need, you're obligated. So let's look at this this law in its source. If you look over here, it says like this. In verse 21, this is in the book of Exodus. It says, Kol almana, any widow, veyatom, and orphan, loy sa'anun, you shall not oppress. Okay? Now look at the next words. Im aneta neoto, if you will oppress or surely oppress them. Now there's a second warning. So first of all, it's a warning that we're not allowed to oppress them at all. But it says, Im tzakilai, it's actually a warning. If that person will cry out to me upon their affliction or their pain, Shema Eshma Tzakato, I will certainly listen to their cry. Now, it goes a little bit harsher, a little bit more harsher. It says, V'chara api, and my anger will be fired up, will be kindled by Ragti etchem b'charev, and you will be killed by the sword. Vayunashechem almanot, uvnechem yitomim. It will cause that your wives should become widows. In other words, you yourself will become pass away if it's a male talking about it, and your children will be orphaned. Now, I think that's probably one of the freakiest warnings that the Torah has. It doesn't have many other such strong warnings. This is almost like an exception in the Torah where it tells us such a harsh punishment. It's a unique type of law that way. So when you look at this thing, it's telling us not only should you not. There's first of all, there's a law. You're not allowed to oppress them. Which telling us not only to oppress them, there's actually other places we talk about obligations to take care of them, which teach us we're obligated to take care of them. Furthermore, it tells us that the punishment for being oppressing the widow or the orphan is different to the punishment for oppressing anybody else. Now, there's a few interesting things over here. Number one is telling us this. It says, why shouldn't you do it? It tells us, okay, first we're not allowed to. Okay, good. Furthermore, it says, because when they cry out to me and I see that you are the cause of their pain and suffering, I will certainly listen to them. Now, why is God telling us that he will listen to doesn't he listen to all of us? Certainly God listens to all of our prayers. And now he's telling us when somebody is going to pray for your downfall or for because of the pain, that they should stop the pain that somebody's causing them, then God will certainly listen. It teaches us something. Well, what the Torah is trying to teach us, what God is trying to teach us over here is I listen to everybody's prayers. But not everybody has, so to speak, an open door to me. People that have themselves suffered and have been through their own pain, particularly, or feel lonely, their prayers, and obviously their prayers for the good, will be heard as well. So we're told that just like if you have an orphan, if you have a child, God forbid, that is hurt, that is sick, your empathy for that child just goes out. If anybody's ever had, God forbid, a sick child, at the moments while that child is sick, if anybody tried to harm the child, it would be more extreme than if they harmed a child that was not unwell. Because you feel more the pain of that child. You feel more the responsibility that you have to that child. And therefore, it's like, if somebody were to say, if you heard a sick child, a child that's not well, so, I see a parent that has, I've seen this, unfortunately, parent that has 7, 8 children, suddenly one gets, let's say one one got sick, had cancer, God forbid, the whole family comes to a halt, right? They had to move the entire family overseas with one child. The father had to stay with the child. Not that the other children, God forbid, I'm sure the other children to a certain degree lost some of their attention. They did. But this child needs extra attention now. That needs to have time spent with them. And that's an expected concept, and hopefully children will understand that. It's not easy for the other children, but that's the way it is. When you see a child, you see somebody who's suffering, your heart goes out to them naturally. So God tells us the same thing with me. When I see that for whatever reason a person has lost their husband, a person has lost their parent, then be careful, because I am super sensitive to those people. It's a fascinating thing. Now, what's the punishment? Generally, for a lot of concepts in Torah, in biblical, in temple times, there was a punishment that was given. They allocated punishments for certain things. The Torah allocates. Sometimes, if you do, let's say you kill somebody, the death penalty is given to you. The Beth Din can give you the death penalty. Certain sins that that a person does can get whipping, makot, it's called, lashes. That was a common punishment in all time. The Torah actually does not really prescribe jail as a punishment, although the rabbis talk about it as a possibility, but it's not really used in the same way. But when it comes to oppressing the widow and the orphan, the Torah gives us a different answer. What is the punishment? What is the punishment for oppressing the widow or the orphan? Let's have a quick look again. Just a quick reminder. It says, if you will do it, I will take revenge, and I will take it. What a revenge will be that you will get. Our rabbis tell us, mida keneged mida. See if I can show you the Rashi. The Rashi takes us to a really extreme point. Rashi says, it could have just said, I will kill you. What I know, if it just said if the verse just said, I will kill you by the sword, what do I know? That your wives will automatically be widows. So why does it have to tell us that your wives will be widows and your children will be? That's obvious. If a person is married and he dies, his children become orphans. So what is it telling us? It's a good question, right? Fascinating question of Rashi. So it seems like the Torah is telling us extra words. No, it's actually an extra curse for the person that curses, that oppresses the widow. It's telling us that the wives will be bound in living widowhood. What does that mean? This is extreme punishment. They will not have witnesses to the death of their husbands. They'll be forbidden to get married. Now, this is just an extreme case. I didn't want to get into this, but I just wanted to show you how extreme the Torah case is. It says, not only will your wives be a widow, but they themselves won't be able to find the husband. And there's a whole concept known as I just forgot the word. It will come back to me.
Aguna.
An aguna, thank you. An aguna. An aguna is a woman that doesn't have that can't get remarried, but is not really in a relationship. Let's say a husband separates but refuses to get a divorce, or a woman whose husband dies but they have no witnesses to prove 100% that that the husband died. In such a case, the woman's not allowed to get married. And that's much worse than just the death of a husband, because now the woman is bound up by that person. So it's telling us, so says Rashi, it's telling us not that they will be widowed once, they will remain widows for their entire life. They won't even be able to get married. What is a yatom? An orphan has the ability to go and receive money as an inheritance. Your orphans won't be able to touch your inheritance, your will, whatever you left over, because they don't have proof of your death. It's a whole halakhic concept in and of itself. But you're just seeing the extremity of where the Torah is going, of our responsibility to take care and care for those that have hurted somebody else. Have oppressed the widow or the orphan. Okay, so it's not like I like talking about punishments or whatever. It's a very rare concept. But what I did want to show you is how unique this case is, in the sense of how out of the way the Torah is going to tell us about the punishments that are there. When you see the uniqueness of the punishment, you understand the importance of the mitzvah. The Torah rarely goes into details of punishment. This is one of the exceptions, to tell us how much God cares for those people that are sensitive, that are struggling, that have lost somebody. That's the person. Now, when does this responsibility apply? The responsibility applies to all people, no matter who, at all times in all places. But the Torah actually does not officially give, there's no punishment prescribed by the Beit Din. What's the punishment? God will cause the punishment to happen. What punishment will that person receive? The punishment that the person will receive is they'll get midah keneged midah. They will end up in the same situation of the person that they oppressed. But not only that, even worse. But it's not caused by the Beit Din. The Beit Din has nothing that they can do about it. If they find that somebody's oppressed, because they could warn them and they should rebuke them or whatever it is. But that's no official biblical punishment. It's a punishment given by Hashem. Now, what it's telling us is this. I like telling my children the difference between, there's different things. Everything is made up of a different type of material. So a bouncing ball made of rubber is a great thing to bounce around the garden, not the house, bounce around the outdoors, right? Because it has that type of material. But if you had a glass crystal ball and you decided to play bouncy with it, it wouldn't be bouncing so well, and it wouldn't be fun. Let's just say that. It's not a fun game. It ends before it starts. That's because it's made up of a different material. Now, human beings in general, we have our life experiences, and we're made up of different material. But there's it's telling us the truth is that there's the biblical understanding of the pasuk, and there's the general understanding of the pasuk. The biblical understanding of the pasuk is, it's particularly talking about a widow, is a woman that lost her husband, or an orphan. And what is the halacha described as an orphan? Is somebody that doesn't have the ability to fully take care of their own needs, that requires other people to support them. So if it's an adult that is independent, living on their own, they would not be halachically described as an orphan. But if it's a child or it's somebody that's in need, even though they are an adult, so generally would say someone that's married, they're not under the guardianship or the responsibility of their parents, and their parent passes away, they're not considered an orphan, halachically. Sometimes even teenagers or definitely young adults, if they've moved out of the house, etc. But if they're a person that are dependent on their parents, then even if they're older, they can be considered an orphan. Okay, so there's no general age. That's the biblical understanding. The non-biblical understanding is that anybody that is a sensitive person, that has had a difficult life, or that is broken-hearted, that is struggling in some way, we have a responsibility to protect them and to be counted them and not to oppress them. Anybody we see that is, so to speak, easy victims, that's your responsibility. Okay, I want to pause for a moment. Anybody have any questions before I go on?
Fritz, you can.
Fritz.
Okay, you mentioned that the rabbis are not responsible for.
There's when I said responsible, I mean that they don't have the Torah does not tell us a punishment that the rabbi should be giving to those people. That's what I meant by responsibility. Thanks. That's what I meant. It doesn't mean the rabbis are not responsible. The rabbis are. The leaders, actually, we're going to talk about in a moment. The leaders of the community are responsible to take care of them. Yes. And we'll see some certain unique cases where halakha provides for unique situations and how these people are supposed to be cared for by the leaders of the community. Okay?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that. That's an important point. 100%. They are responsible, but they don't have the responsibility to, the Torah doesn't say. So often the Torah will say, this is the punishment. A death penalty is given for this law, or you shall, there's ways that say that this person gets malchus, lashes, etc. Nothing is given over as a clear punishment. That's what I meant by responsibility. Okay, Joe, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I'm reflecting on what we just talked about and its applicability to, say, Centrelink, National Disability Insurance Scheme, these major federal government programs, aged care. Ironically, it's maybe not coincidence. It's all those big programs which are all said, that all exist to look after exactly those vulnerable, fragile people. And they're where the biggest problems are right now, where the media is full of stories where the vulnerable, fragile have not been looked after at all by those programs. On the contrary, their situations actually got worse. Whether it's people with disability, aged care, etc. So it's a fascinating concept for me. I've been involved in some of this advocacy, is that if the government departments that ran those programs were genuinely concerned with that principle, and it was their number one guiding principle, those systems, those processes would probably have to change quite a bit. I'm curious to know how it operates in Israel, the equivalent social security disability programs, if they are guided by the same Torah principle.
That's an interesting question. I don't have an answer to that question. I'll say this, that in general, it's an interesting concept. I know this is kind of like a capitalist versus socialist debate to a certain degree, when you start talking about handing out money and social welfare and all those type of things. And the basic answer is that there are people that are in need. They should be handed, there's certain people that are actually in need. There was no people that were giving out charity before the Jewish community. We've been doing it since the days in Egypt, since the days of Moshe. Moshe's mother and sister, Shifra and Pua, were the local midwives helping women. It's going back thousands of years, and we've always had charity organizations way before anybody else took care of it. In Judaism, we never believed in survival of the fittest. It just wasn't such a concept. It's not a Jewish concept. The survival is through fittest taking care of everybody else. Now, with that being said, in today's day and age, when some of these agencies get a little bit, it gets so big and it comes to government agencies and it's not coming through particularly the right hands, sometimes it could cause that instead of people being helped by these organizations, they become dependent on them, etc., which is, could be detrimental to their growth and their self-belief and their ability to go out and really make a difference and do something with their lives. So it's a really difficult question. Definitely something that is way beyond our discussion, but understanding that there's definitely a need for welfare and health, getting the right balance is something which is a real challenge. Yeah. Yochanan? Go ahead. Yeah, go.
Okay. I was going to say in London, for instance, very much in the early days when we had a lot of Russian Jewish migration in, and they had sweatshops, of course, and they was using sewing and making clothing. They were one of the first to start up a union to protect themselves from being worked in a sort of sweatshop situation in Whitechapel or the areas that were very Jewish in London. So the Jewish organized their own union to stop that happening. Just as, by the way, This
interesting.
was,
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah.
that's a sort of, it was a form of socialism, and or quite socialistic, I suppose, in terms of their attitude at that time. We're talking about, you know, late 1800,
Okay.
1890.
Interesting. Yeah. So yeah, I think it's something that perhaps the Jewish world probably does have something to teach in certain ways, and I think in Judaism we also have what to learn and to grow. But definitely in general, when it comes to looking out for those people in need, well, it's just on this point I wanted to say, and Joe, you definitely, I think you brought this up in another show in the past. The Torah classifies a bunch of different levels in charity, and one of the highest levels in charity is discussed about giving a loan to somebody. Right? When you see somebody is in need and you give them a loan, if they're an ability that you know they're going to have ability to pay up, that's the better. Why? Because people, when they get a loan, they don't feel like they're receiving charity. Number one. Number two is you're empowering them. You're saying, here's a loan, go and start your own business, etc., or partnering with somebody in a business or something like that. That's considered a very high level of charity. Why? Because it's not about um, how can making that person dependent on you. It's about empowering the person to go and do something themselves, and some people just need that initial start. Although that's just one element of charity. Some people actually need charity, just being given money and not to pay back. All right, let's Joe, you want to say one more comment?
Well, a question actually on the Parsha, because it's interesting that the Torah could have said directly, help the widow and orphan, but it doesn't say directly a commandment to help. It says not to oppress. And I wonder if there's any expansion on what it means, the difference between helping and not oppressing.
Okay, so I hear your question. I've thought about this myself. I could just tell you that I think there are, I may be mistaken, but I believe that there's another pasuk that talks about actually helping the widow and the orphan. It could be that I'm mistaking it with a pasuk from Nevi'im or Ksuvim, from the prophets or the writing. But I think there is another pasuk which I couldn't find. Nevertheless, I could tell you what the oral Torah does tell us. The oral Torah is, in other words, what the interpretations that we have written in the Mishnah and Gemara, and that's brought down in the books, the Sfarim, Sefer HaChinuch, that describe this mitzvah. They describe this mitzvah as not just oppressing, but it's also obligation to care. So yeah, it's a valid point, and I don't have a solid answer for that. As I say, I believe there is a clear answer. So based on that, let's go on to my last few points that I wanted to mention, which is, what are obligations to these people, to an orphan and particularly widow, but all sensitive people? So the Talmud enumerates certain things. First of all, when you see an orphan, to be extra specially sensitive, and particularly the way you speak to them. When we speak, we always speak with kindness. We have to find ways to help them and care for whatever needs that they have. Definitely not allowed to hit them. And sometimes it even says that the protection and the care that we give to orphans has to go beyond that which we would give to ourselves. Now, to a certain degree, that applies to all Jews. Love your fellows yourself. But it seems more specific when it comes to the orphan and the widow. Now, it's interestingly enough, when we talk about orphans, there's a bunch of different laws. There's hundreds of laws in, for example, the Rambam, about unique laws that apply to orphans. Because orphans could be young children that could have maybe got an inheritance. Let's say, maybe their parents owned a field or whatever it was, owned a house, and they're not really in the right responsibility. They don't have the right age or understanding to take care of it. So this is where I speak about the rabbis, or the Beth Din, if there is a Beth Din at the time, are obligated to set up what's called an apotropos. An apotropos is a guardian, as a guardian for these children, to take care of all of their needs, and a guardian over all of their property. And then they were supposed to check up on them to make sure that they're not abusing that their property. I'm just trying to see what the other. There's another example, is that because they may struggle, if they, let's say a orphan has to come to court against somebody else, generally the Beth Din is not allowed to argue on behalf of one of the litigants. Now, it depends which type of cases, but that's the general way. You're not allowed to side more with one of the litigants, except for when it comes to an orphan and a widow. Because an orphan and a widow are some people that could be more sensitive or lower self-esteem, or not have the ability to find somebody to help them argue their case. They don't have their family background or that other support. The Beth Din are obligated to find arguments to support them. It doesn't mean they still have to adjudicate with the correct law. In other words, who is the right, and they have to find the truth. But there's the one time where they're actually supposed to try to find defenses and ways to argue on their behalf, which is unique, because generally any type of bribe is forbidden. But this is where we say, because they're in a lower situation to start off with, they could be more trouble. Another interesting law when it comes to orphans and widows is, if somebody is owed money by an orphan or by the orphan's father, for example, that passed away, in order for that person to collect what is owed to them from the orphans, he is obligated to take an oath, to swear that he's owed that money. Normally, a person is not obligated to take that oath. But because we are concerned that sometimes people may take advantage, they'd say, hey, that millionaire died and he left a few $1 million to his children. They don't even know. I'm going to say, or I'll write a letter, whatever it is, that he owes me $100,000. No, it won't harm. They won't even know. They don't know about their father's thing. So the Torah, making a false oath is considered a very severe thing. So therefore, it's not necessarily enough just to present a document saying I'm owed or whatever it is. They actually have to take an oath before they're able to take it. And this is once again an extra protection for the orphans. That doesn't apply to other people. Generally, if you come to the Beth Din and you claim so-and-so owes me this money, and you could present something that's legal, a document that proves it, some type of contract, that suffices. It doesn't work when it comes to orphans. You have to also take an oath. Now, taking an oath is considered, once again, a severe thing.
So what happens if a widow takes advantage of these obligations of other people, bully other people, get away with it because rabbis support her, because she's a widow, and she keeps going and gets whatever she wants because she's getting away with it? How do you deal with that situation?
Listen, the truth is, it's a good question. It's a good question, and it's a very tricky question once we've presented what we presented today on the importance and how careful we have to be. I wouldn't be able to answer in a general on a specific case. I would obviously have to say that you would have to take each thing on a case-to-case basis, and probably even within each case itself, as in within dealing with that individual person, sometimes you would have to say it doesn't mean that you're allowed to be abused by them, and if they're being abusive, then they have to be stopped, put in their tracks. Abusive behavior is criminal no matter who's doing it. But it could be that that person's lacking the right support, and that's why they're behaving in such a manner. It's just that they're lashing out at the people that are closest to them because of their pain and anxiety that they're having as a result of their situation. So these are things that have to be looked at. Sometimes the person is knowingly and willingly going and acting it this way just so that people will be obligated to take care of them, and is just trying to make life, so to speak, difficult for other people. Most of the time, I would say, in such a situation, most of the time, but not always, these people are just really suffering and really struggling and don't have the right background and the right foundations and support that they need to really take control of their life. And that's resulting in them sending abuse to other people. Now, it doesn't mean that the abuse should be accepted. It means that we have to find a way to help this person stop being abusive and find the right support that person is. And that's, I think, the goal. Find the way to support that person shouldn't even be. But if they continue to be abusive, even after they have the correct support doesn't mean be giving them and inviting them over to meals and whatever it is. That could be the support. But sometimes it could mean that the person is internally struggling with a real sense of loneliness or emptiness in their life, etc., etc. And these things have to be considered. Now, something could apply to anybody. Today's day and age, mental health issues are the number one issue in the world. Mental health issues. It doesn't apply only to orphans and widows. Anybody that is being abusive has to be stopped, but also has to be cared for and has to be taught how to stop being abusive. It doesn't help to take abusive people only. Sometimes it has to be done when their abuse is being really harmful to other people, that they have to be either locked up in jail or in a psychiatric ward. That sometimes is the need in extreme cases. But I would say that many times more, just as important as the repercussion that person has, there also has to be support for these people and figuring out why are these people actually being abusive. And that doesn't, once again, it doesn't apply only to the widow and the orphan. It applies to anybody that is in a situation where they're acting up in an unhealthy way. Yes, Joe.
Apologies, Rabbi. I interpreted Fritz's question a little bit differently, or maybe I got it wrong. Okay. I was thinking from his question, referring to things like the debate over the family court, where there's a feeling that women have far too much of a power advantage in the family court, things like that, where these are allegations in the media that people are playing the system and getting unfair advantage, is how I heard it. I don't know.
But he's talking about a widow, so
yeah.
It's not talking about. I'm aware of what you're talking about in case of divorce, where women are sometimes getting an upper hand, or at least trying to get an upper hand, and it happens both ways, men and women, trying to get an upper hand, whether it means more money or more custody or things like that. I don't see how that would be applicable when it comes to a widow, when they're not really fighting against anybody in particular.
Well, they're seeking support from the community. And what I heard Fritz say, maybe I misheard, and Fritz, feel free to correct me, but I thought what I heard was that a widow may play the system and get unfair advantage from the community.
I appreciate what you say, but I was more referring from personal situation, that I was in an organization or organized something, and a widow came along and tried to take over. In the end, she did take over. It didn't work out. I took back, but she was very unpleasant about it, to put it really nicely. Usually I don't argue, but I had to defend my little patch and what I had achieved, because it was about to be destroyed because she wanted to take over. And I felt that she got false and unjustifiable support.
I think that, as I said, that's why each case has to be taken, and so your case is a particularly unique case. I'm not saying it's unique as in it's the only one. I'm saying it's a specific case. And therefore, in such a case, once again, it doesn't mean that these people are allowed to take advantage or they automatically win in court, so to speak. And court doesn't mean court. It doesn't mean in life that they're going to get whatever they want. It just means that in general, we have to be more supportive of them, have to find ways to support them. But if they are taking advantage, so to speak, of the system, then I don't think it applies, to be honest. I don't think it applies to people that are taking advantage of the system.
No.
And I think that there's a law that we've talked about in the past. We speak about in a few weeks ago or a few months ago, we spoke about the same law that we have, the obligation to be extra protective of the convert, but we still say that the same law applies to them, that they're not above the law. And the same thing is over here. Yes, you have an obligation to support them. Yes, you have an obligation to be gentle and sensitive to them and to protect them in whatever way and making sure that no one is taking advantage of them, because that's the normal. But if, on the other hand, they are taking advantage of the system of other people or being abusive, then they are not above the law. 100%, I would think that is perfectly within the laws of Torah. Okay, let me just, there's a few more things that I want to say, but the idea ultimately of all this is to teach us that it doesn't make a difference on the person's social economic status. It's about, a person could be wealthy. They could be really wealthy, but if somebody's in need, sometimes the wealthiest people are also in need. They lost something, they may need support, and may need friendship, whatever it is. We have to find the right ways to help them. It doesn't have to be financial. It could be in all our types of ways. It's about being empathizing, being sensitive to them and saying, what if in their situation, what would I need, or what do they really need in their situation? So I'll conclude with one quick short story that one of the great Amoraim, rabbis, early rabbis of the Talmud era, this is post-Mishnaic era, was a rabbi by the name of Shmuel. Now, Shmuel's father was known and famous for taking extra special care and collecting charity for orphans. And there's a story related in the Talmud how the one time when he collected a huge amount of money for a particular family of orphans, before he was able to distribute that money, he passed away. And nobody knew where the money was. And many people started accusing him and saying after he passed away, saying that he must have taken the money for himself. Where did the money go? You know, that's the way people are. Where's the money? He must have died. We can't find it. He must have used it himself. And here was a person that had dedicated his life to helping orphans and widows. And Shmuel, being one of the leaders at the time, he had his Rav and Shmuel. He's one of the most famous and great rabbis of the Talmud. He couldn't, so to speak, he couldn't handle it and didn't like the fact that people were talking disparagingly, and he also wanted to know what happened to the money from the orphans. So he went to his father's burial site and he prayed to Hashem that he should have answer. And he had a dream a short while later where his father came to him in a dream and told him that there's a I think it was a mill or something like that. And in the mill, there's three layers. There's three layers of bricks or something, or hiding places. The top layer is his money. The bottom layer is his money. And in the middle is the money for the orphans. And Shmuel said, why did you do it that way? And he responded by saying, I was worried that if the top would be discovered, at least they would discover our money first. And if they had to take money, or if it would get ruined by the rain, our money would get ruined. The bottom money, I put our money also on the bottom so that if some money had to get ruined or rusted or destroyed by the earth, it would be our money. But I didn't want the orphans, I wanted the orphans' money to be protected. And of course he went and he found the money, and he was able to save his father's name and at the same time also find his own inheritance. So anyway, that's the story of Shmuel's father saving and protecting the orphans. But once again, I wanted to, it's something that I was thinking, I don't know if I should say, but when I was in school, unfortunately, one of the boys in my class, I remember he lost his mother, and he was misbehaving. He was a troublesome kid. He misbehaved even before his mother. His mother was not well for many years, and he had difficulties at home. But I remember we had a substitute teacher, and she didn't know that this child had just lost his mother literally a few weeks earlier, and he kind of played on her, and he was misbehaving, and obviously it was misbehaving for he had difficulties. But I remember at some point, either it was me or one of the other students, can't remember. I feel like I may have said something. By the way, you should try not to be so harsh on him. He's actually, we were in year 6. Somebody said to him, can't remember who, he lost his mother a short while ago. And it was only normal to see that in a short amount of time, she said she flipped and she changed. And she stopped telling him off, stopped sending him out the class. And she said to him, you lost your parent. And she started to become very careful. And I actually saw just in her change of attitude, how his behavior actually really changed when he got that extra care and that extra sensitivity. Unfortunately, that child, a short while later, his father also passed away, and he had a really difficult upbringing. But these are things that we have to be aware about. And when we see somebody, whatever the person's in need, we should try to find a way to help these people. It doesn't have, once again, doesn't have to be the orphan. Anybody that is struggling in any way, if we have the ability to help them, we certainly should. Okay.
Can I ask you one more question?
I'm going to end the share officially there. So thank you, everybody. If anybody wants to go, good, and have a good night. Thank you. If anybody has any questions, you're welcome to stay on. But the share is over. Okay. Thank you. Have a good night.
Good. I have one more question.
Yeah.
You just mentioned that somebody passed away and somebody else wanted to protect his reputation. Now, while you are alive, you need a good reputation to function properly in society. Once when you die, God knows what you have done during your life. So it doesn't matter what people think about you, what they say about you, because God knows the truth, and therefore, is it worth fighting for?
That's a fascinating question. Wow, I really find that's a very interesting question. Very interesting question. Well, first of all, there's two things. Number one, yes, it does make a difference, because what people say about a person after death is a lot about the legacy that that person leaves behind, and the person still feels the repercussions. It's not as though the person's gone. The person still exists, and he still feels and is still connected to the world. And it does have an impact. If people are suffering as a result of somebody's actions that passed away, that has a negative impact. And vice versa, when people are having blessings as a result of somebody that's passed on, that has a positive impact. That being said, there's also another factor, which is the descendants, which in this case, who is the one that suffers the most probably, and I don't know what type of suffering goes on with the actual soul. But without a doubt, they say the statement, he's turning around in his grave, or is there something like that? That's, I think there's truth to that to a certain degree. When people, besmirch somebody that passed away, it's just not right. It's not nice. At least if the person is generally a good person. I could tell you that my grandfather, it's no secret, my grandfather was one of the greatest rabbis, in my opinion, in Australian history, if not the greatest. And unfortunately, after he passed away, he made a few mistakes, but people took advantage and tried to make a bad name. And as a descendant of his, that was really difficult. That was really difficult. And not only that, if anybody tried to stand up in his protection, they were brought down by those people that wanted to bring his name or besmirch his name. So for the descendant, it's hard, but particularly somebody that worked and gave their life and dedicated their life to a good cause and to helping others, to besmirch the name is not only bad for that person, which whatever that person's protected by their good deeds, but certainly brings brings I think negativity to the person that's besmirching them, because the person's not even there to defend themselves and to protect themselves. So to make up stories against people that aren't there to defend and to answer for themselves, to me is particularly evil and wrong. Unless you're solidly certain of that evil and wrongdoing, and that person was evil and wrongdoing in their actual life, that's one thing. But to come up afterwards and claim that people were evil because of whatever it is, I think that's problematic. And in the case that I mentioned with Shmuel, here you see Shmuel, who suffered the most. We don't know what was going on, but he was definitely, his father had a legacy. He had built a charitable organization, so to speak, at least the way I understand, around helping orphans. And now people are claiming he's putting it to his own money. That's a troublesome concept. And who felt the repercussions more than anybody was his son. And he felt the obligation to defend his father's honor and legacy. So I think that, in short, I think that our legacy that we leave behind is very important. Although, yes, it is secondary. I do agree with that point. It's not crucial. The most important is to be a good person, live a good life, and not be looking for honor and all those type of things. But it is important thing to remember, to live a good legacy. And that's why it's important that when people, we write wills and we leave a legacy, what are you teaching your children? What are you leaving behind? What type of morals? And what are you doing with your money that you leave behind? Are you leaving them to children that don't know how to take care of them? Or are you leaving them to Jewish cause that can? Or, of course, everyone should be giving a decent percentage of their wealth to their children, 100%. But it's just about acknowledging. Some people take their wealth and put it into, they'll send it to the fishing club down the road, whatever it is. If that's what they feel is their legacy they want to leave behind, then that's what they will do. But some people will leave it to other organizations. I think those things are important. Legacies and all these things are actually important. Creating a legacy is an important concept. Yes.
Just to finish off on a funny note.
Good night, don't worry. Go ahead, Fritz. Yeah.
Sorry, just to finish off on a funny note, for the sake of a smile or a laugh.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody turns in the grave because you said something wrong about it, tell another bad thing and he's straight again.
I think the statement is he's turning in his grave. I don't know if he stops when you say a further bad thing, but I hear you. All right. Thanks for ending on that note. And yeah, it was a heavy topic tonight, but also quite a straightforward one. So thank you everybody for joining, and we will see you next week. By the way, next week, I may not do a shiur. I have a conference which ends at 4:15 in Geelong, which is going for a few days, starts early Monday morning, and I only get back late Tuesday. So I'm not sure I'll have time to prepare a shiur. If I prepare a shiur beforehand, I will let you know, and there'll be a shiur. If not, we will skip it next week. So I will try to let you know in advance. And then the next Tuesday, my wife's away, but that should be okay. I should still be able to prepare a shiur. They have a rabbinical conference, and the next week they're doing the Rebbitzins conference. So hopefully we'll see you soon. And we've got, of course, the Thursday shiur. Have a good Shabbos, and we'll see you soon. Have a good night.
Thank you,
Rabbi. Good night.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Ryan,
All
thank
the
you,
best.
Fritz. Thank you,
All the
Joe.
best.
Thanks for joining.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Good night.
Thank you, Rabbi.
You too. Thank you.